Good morning, mate. How you doing? And 1952 is the year I'd like to go back to with response to your previous caller.
And why is that?
I think everything was a lot better then, apart from the rickets and the threat of thermonuclear annihilation.
Well, there was that.
Aside from those two, hula hoops and there wasn't really a youth culture, which has kind of destroyed the country, and we weren't worried about the earth burning to bits, only being immolated by the Russians. It was a much nicer time.
Well, at least you knew your enemy at that point. I mean, I agree. The 70s, though, we had the threat of nuclear war. I wasn't keen on that.
No, I loved the 70s. I loved the 70s for the music and for the interior design, which was
Did you? Very floral.
Yeah, it was. I remember my parents got the kitchen done out in vinyl orange and brown wallpaper. You went in there and your eyes started to bleed.
It was the
wonderful.
thing. It was the thing. I had brown carpet.
Yeah, bottle of Schlur on the table. Yes, that was it.
Sounds marvellous. Your column today, there's a wonderful piece, actually, with the headline, High Time We Had Braver Thinking on Migrant Crisis. You're right. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Talk us through this.
Well, she's got it in the neck, of course, from the left, as she always does. They really hate her. You just mentioned her name, and they kind of, it's like pouring salt on a slug. They shrivel up, the left, when they hear about her. And yet she said the right thing. I mean, the Refugees Convention was signed in, I think it was 1951, the year before, right? So it's a year of perfection for me. And it simply isn't fit for purpose anymore, because throughout the time since the Refugee Convention, we have added more and more laws to the statute book outlawing discrimination of any kind. And as Suella Braverman quite rightly says, it's no longer about there to protect refugees who are fleeing persecution and war. It's there to protect people who feel they might face some sort of bias in their home country. And that's why she's picked up particularly on the fact that it shouldn't be a case that you could come here necessarily simply because you're gay and you live in a country where homosexuality isn't allowed. And I think that's right, because if you look at the numbers of people who are likely to come here, Centre for Policy Studies says there's somewhere in the region of 782 million. I think that's probably a bit excessive, but, it's a lot of people and we cannot take everybody in. And I haven't yet heard an argument from the left as to say what we actually should do. They never come up with one.
No, and I thought that comment which you allude to about persecution or discrimination is absolutely right. And you're right, it was set up in 1951. And of course, as you say, there's all this bolt-ons. And what the public want is they want this migrant crisis sorted. Now, they've heard about Scampton and Wethersfield and the Bibi Stockholm and Rwanda. And then you've got some dude in Strasbourg saying we can't do anything, even though we're a sovereign democratic country.
No, that's right. There's only about two places we could send anyone, and that's Denmark or New Zealand. Everywhere else, just every country is outlawed. Undoubtedly, gay rights are not as advanced in, for example, Albania as they are over here, in which case we can't send anyone back to Albania. So effectively, every single route away from here is blocked to us. And obviously, we cannot take all the millions of people who wish to come here.
Now, you also mentioned the Labour Party. You say it criticised Braverman. Of course it did. I don't understand what the Labour Party wants to do. It says that the government isn't doing a good enough job. What should it do? What would the Labour Party do?
Well, the Labour Party, if the Labour Party were really canny, it would outflank the Tories and Suella Braverman on the right on this issue. And there's no reason why it shouldn't. What they should do is say, look, we are absolutely committed to making sure that the refugees who come here are those who are the most deserving. And that means we do have to stop these youngish men from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, coming here in boats across the Channel, because they are stopping people who genuinely need to come here, such as old people, the elderly, women, children, the disabled, who really, really need refugee status, and then take a far harder line on dealing with the illegal migrants. That would be a vote winner. Because, especially up here where I am in what used to be called the red wall seats, people do care very much about the levels of immigration into this country, and particularly those who arrive here in boats. And it would be a canny move, but they seem to have no ability to grasp that, or perhaps more likely, while I think Sir Keir Starmer probably would, and Yvette Cooper probably would like to do something a bit more stentorian, there's that vast bulk of the population, of the party, which just says, oh, let them all in. They're lovely. Just let them all in. They're really nice.
But hang on a minute. With Starmer, what that would take is conviction. He doesn't have any conviction.
Yes. I think you're absolutely right on that, Nick. Yes, he has no conviction, or at least he does have conviction, and then he suddenly decides 2 weeks later that his conviction has been misplaced and changes it to another conviction, about which he seems equally fervent. He is a very strange politician. But, you know, in fairness, they are the opposition and they're allowed to criticise. I get that. But it would be, as we approach an election, it would be, I think, signal of them to say, look, this really is a big problem. We've got to do something about it. And simply saying we're going to be nicer to the French.
No one should do that.
No one should do that, no, indeed. Because none of that plays very well. People want a clear policy as to how we're going to stop this happening. And the problem at the moment, of course, is these refugees come here, and there are a legion of lawyers who are one day going to find themselves burning in the deepest pit of hell, I suspect, who are able to give them, you know, succor and make sure they don't get deported to Rwanda. And there's confusion about all of it. You know, the left supports the NGOs who are helping the migrants, and as the Italians are saying at the moment, and Giorgia Meloni is saying, these people are the cause of the crisis. It's not so much the refugees, it's the NGOs who facilitate their arrival.
Yeah, you know? And also what you're seeing in Europe, and obviously I spent some time in the EU, you're seeing all of the countries in Europe actually saying, hang on a minute, we don't want this migration that's coming into our country.
No, that's right.
I'm finding it very amusing to see Ursula von der Leyen actually on the ropes over this, increasingly.
Yeah, it's not just von der Leyen, though. Germany, there's the AfD, the right-wing party, is growing enormously in the polls, particularly in the east of the country. The French are now, Macron even, who is obviously a liberal, is cozying up to Giorgia Meloni and saying we're going to strike some sort of deal to sort out migrants. And just wait till you see the election result in Slovakia over this coming weekend, because I think you're probably likely to see someone who is a shade to the right of Viktor Orban taking over. That's Robert Fico. So Europe gets it, I think, and Europe has been, over the last 10 years, swinging very profoundly towards parties which say they will do something about this. And that's sometimes parties of the left, but it's more often populist parties of the right. And
you make a great point. You know, when I was there, the parties like the AfD were growing stronger. They liked what we were doing. And I think around Europe, many countries are thinking what we have done is the right move. And they're now summoning, may I say, the courage to do so, or to do something similar?
No, that's right, because it was always the case that the actual populations, the voting populations of these countries, weren't happy with the levels of immigration that were coming in. I mean, really, really unhappy about it. But just as over here, there's a liberal elite in Europe, which is even more entrenched, of course, because of the European Union, and which persecutes countries which dare to go their own way, much as it's persecuted Poland, we know, and persecuted Hungary, has sent warnings to Austria that they mustn't vote for anyone who Ursula von der Leyen doesn't like. That liberal elite, which ignores the wishes of the people, is far more entrenched in a bureaucracy like the European Union, which we mercifully got ourselves out of.
Well, I'm not sure. Does anyone actually like Ursula von der Leyen? I think that's a bigger question.
It is a good. I sometimes get it confused with Lana Del Rey, but that's. I realise they're in two very different spheres. But it's just I have an adult brain, and they all get mixed up.
Well, let's move on to a very important story, and I think this is a big story, which is about the number of pubs that are closing. I think this is a national travesty. The fact is, your column says that 400 bars have closed in the first half of this year alone. I am not surprised.
Yeah, I think it's terrifying. I think it's bad news simply because, it's nice to go down the pub. And Britain used to be a country of pubs. Times change, we know this. But at the same time, over the last 50, 60 years, churches have closed down. And churches used to be the hub of our communities. And in a way, pubs took over as being the hub of our communities. I don't see that anything is taking over from pubs as being the place that you go to, the place where you meet your members of your community and get on with them and chat with them and so on. And it just adds towards what we might pretentiously call, in sociological terms, the atomization or anomie of the country, that we're no longer a section of communities who pull together. We're far more disparate and spread out than we ever used to be. We move more than we ever used to. We're far more transient. And I think all that stuff adds to, is there somewhere in these horrible crime rates which we have at the moment, and the lack of respect that there is for the police. Although, of course, the police have also got something to do with that themselves.
Well, in my village, we've lost our local pub. I've got a meeting about it today, what we're going to do about it. So you can't talk in the pub, but also young people not going to the pub. Then you've got all the banks shutting, so older people can't even have a chat because there aren't any banks. Then the post office is now overwhelmed. There aren't enough rural post offices. Basically, the whole of society, or rural society, is being decimated.
Yes, it is. And the same thing's happening up here, and it's even more injurious because it's quite a high elderly population up here. I'm in the middle of the Pennines on the Durham-Northumberland border. And, our local village, there are still pubs, but the banks have closed down and most of the shops will only take cash. We're not London, there are signs up in the shops saying cash is king because they like using cash. And they're working on very small margins, and the 15% which the credit card companies take, is crucial to them. And you're right as well that it is largely the elderly who are being persecuted in this way. Just as they're being persecuted when they try to get on a train and there are no guards and there's no ticket office, you've got to do it all online. A lot of people aren't happy with that. It wouldn't take much for us just to care a little bit for the next 10 to 15 years about those people who aren't as happy online as, the rest of us are. It wouldn't cost us much to do that.
No,